All right, causes and impacts of climate change. So, climate change has been a normal feature of the Earth's history, but human activity has contributed to recent changes. So, you might hear the common argument, oh, climate change has happened before. But as we've seen with a lot of past climate changes, on the one hand, it usually happens over a much longer time period. We're talking thousands of years, if not tens of thousands of years, versus hundreds or 100 years. And then on the second point, even though climate change, or like, yes, climate change has happened a lot in the past. And when it does happen in the past, a lot of species go extinct because of it. So just because it happens in the past doesn't mean it's a good thing. There's been significant debate about the cause of climate change. Though 97 out of 100 climate experts agree that humans are the cause of current climate change, which is why they specify anthropogenic climate change. Climate change causes widespread and significant impacts on a global scale. We could have impacts on water by melting of ice caps, by raising of oceans, by more droughts or more rainstorms. We have effects on productivity. We might actually see an increase in some productivity as there's more carbon dioxide. And then there'll be lots of impacts on people and societies as well. So there's an important distinction between climates and weather here. Congress people might come in and say, oh, look, there's snow on the ground, so obviously climate change isn't real. We're looking at long-term versus the short-term variations in weather. So the desert, is typically hot and dry, but just because it rains doesn't mean it's not a desert. The oceanic and atmospheric circulatory systems help distribute heat and energy around the globe, which then in turn affects weather and climate. So we get most of our heat and energy along the equator here, and then the ocean circulation system helps bring that warm water towards Europe. And so actually, you think about the climate in some place like Scotland or Germany, and it's pretty. I mean, it's a little cold, but it's not too bad. It's pretty mild. But if you follow the latitude over, you're actually like way up in northern Canada here. So without that circulation of energy, without that warm water making the climate way more mild, it would be a lot more miserable there. Human activities are increasing levels of greenhouse gases. Those greenhouse gases include CO2, the big one, as well as methane from like agriculture and decomposition of compost. And water vapor itself is also a greenhouse gas. So you can see a correlation here showing temperature and carbon dioxide. Human activities increase those greenhouse gases, and then that increase can lead to increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather events. So we're seeing stronger storms with more water and more precipitation. They actually had to come up with a new color for the map of Hurricane Harvey because there was so much rain. They didn't have enough colors on their graph. And then frequency is just basically how often they're happening. So we're having bigger storms, but they're also occurring more frequently. Human activities, yeah, okay. So we got long-term effects of climate change here. In this case, you're seeing different projections. So if we don't change our current path, if we increase as we're continuing to increase, or if we make some really drastic reductions, you're seeing ppm here referring to parts per million, the parts of carbon per million globs of or molecules of air, basically. And generally the threshold you hear is something like, I think it's 350, because the website's 350.org, because they say we want to try to get back down to 350 parts per million for CO2. Another effect of climate change would be a rise in sea level. So this is, sometimes you might see this is like if everything melted, which is a really, really, really extreme scenario. Even without this most extreme scenario, there's going to be huge effects, and there already are huge effects in coastal cities like Miami, and Venice is seeing increased flooding as I see Daniele about to walk out the door. Other effects of climate change could be changes in water availability. which might be more water or less water. Could be some biome shift. There's actually interesting studies looking at how Joshua trees are moving further north as the climate becomes warmer and they have new habitats. We could have like an increase in areas for agriculture. We could see dramatic changes in biodiversity and ecosystem services. Ocean acidification as the carbon dioxide gets absorbed in the ocean, and then that will affect all the creatures that try to build their shells. So we got some direct examples of changes in water availability. We're already in a mega drought over here. It's only going to get worse. We can see changes here in evapotranspiration. So that's water released through plants, changes in precipitation, changes in water balance. You can see a shift in biomes here. So a change in communities, which I believe this would be projected. Yeah, predicted changes in communities. Other impacts include loss of biodiversity. So a lot of animals can't adapt to really, really fast climate change or rely on areas that might not exist anymore. If you rely on ice pack for hunting in the summer, like a lot of polar bears do, you're going to have a hard time. If you live on the top of a mountain when you can't survive above 75 degrees Fahrenheit, like a little pika, then you're going to have a hard time. Coastal inundations, so rising sea levels, and then all the people that will be affected by those rising sea levels. We tend to build our biggest cities on water because we used to use water as our main source of transportation, at least for large distances. So that's why a lot of the people tend to live in those areas. We see impacts of ocean acidification here. So the increase in CO2 gets absorbed by the ocean, which then turns into carbonic acid. And then that affects organisms that try to produce their shell. Let's see, and then we have damage to human health, extreme heat, we got extreme weather events. You might have like increased air pollution, you know, as we're releasing greenhouse gases, we're also releasing sulfur dioxide and NOx and like all those other really, really nasty things. And then there's lots of positive and negative feedback loops, which can, you know, amplify or decrease or negate effects of climate change. And they're so convoluted, so complex that it's really hard to say exactly, you know, which one is going to affect other ones. There's a lot of studies that go into it, as you can see from this paper here. So due to differing environmental value systems, there's a lot of different opinions. I mean, due to different cultures as well, there's a lot of different opinions. If you go to other countries, they teach climate change a lot differently than we do in the US, where there's a really strong interest to maintain sources of income for fossil fuel industries and other, you know, major polluters that have money and like to influence politicians on both sides of the aisle, which is just really smart of them. This is such a great picture of how complex everything is. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change consists of like thousands of scientists that are working on all this information because we're trying to study like the whole planet, and we're trying to, you know, use information that we weren't actually there for. It's all very complex. And a lot of the times we're trying to create models that will predict what's going to happen. And luckily, the more data we collect, the more accurate those models get. But there's always some level of uncertainty. Some examples of skills would be to discuss some feedback mechanisms that would be associated with climate change, to evaluate contrasting viewpoints on the issue of climate change. Maybe views on whether or not it's real, but also views on what we should do about it. And then some connections. I don't know if you know this, but the climate exists around the whole world. And then some little TOK snippets and a shout out to Mr. Kramer.